Hey, how you doing? I am lost. Seriously, I'm lost. Why? Did you forget to turn on your GPS? No, seriously, I'm lost in tracking all my machine learning projects. Tracking some information like who is the data owner, where the data is coming from, what type of transformation, experimentation has been done, what models are deployed, where they are, whether they are connected to Power BI. Like, I really wish there were a unified solution that I can have my end-to-end lineage for machine learning projects. Well, no need to wish. The solution already exists, my friend. Well, what is the solution then? Well, here are mainly three steps you need to follow to achieve this. Wait, let me take a note. Okay. The first step is turn on your computer and make sure you have proper access to internet. Second, go to MG YouTube channel. And third, make sure you watch the video titled as Machine Learning Lineage with Azure Purview, which is this video. And make sure you watch until the end. You're too funny. Am I? No. Let's go! Hello everyone, this is MG and hoping you are doing great. In this video, what we're going to talk about is how we can use Azure Purview not only for our data governance service, but also having an end-to-end lineage solution for our machine learning projects. So we can capture some evolving steps and informations about machine learning, which is who is the data owner, where the data is coming from, what type of transformation, experimentation we have done on it, training, testing, deployment process, and even visualizing the final outcome. Having end-to-end lineage being showcased and provide information through Azure Purview, which is integrated with other AI platforms on Azure. Let's check it out. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you will get notified for the next video. Thank you. Before we talk about the lineage for machine learning, and as we said, we are going to actually use Purview for enabling that lineage for machine learning, then let's just start with understanding what is Microsoft Purview. So that's a service. You'll see that on Azure. I'll launch it, you'll see the platform, but here with this picture in a nutshell, Microsoft Purview is a governance portal that provides a unified data governance service for managing your data and assets if you have them on-prem or Azure or multi-cloud or even SaaS or software as service data. You can see the different inputs on the left side. From data producer or consumer perspective, you can have the data catalog there, so you will quickly discover what data sets are available. You can do quick discovery there. You can share the data, or you can get some insights from the data. From data officer perspective, you would like to have some data policy on it. You want to classify the data if you have sensitive data, provide access, so on and so forth. So having that end-to-end lineage and governance for data will be possible to achieve with using Purview or Microsoft Purview. Now the question is, can I have this lineage, which is great. It's a unified platform. You just launch it and you can see the history of what happened on the top of that specific data. Who's the data owner? What type of transformation has been done? What is the new data set created after those transformations? So can I have a similar lineage, but this time for machine learning? That means which data was being used to train that data, where the data is trained, what is the assets, what are the assets after training the data, which is the model, for example, or where are the predicted data using that deployed model, if it's real time, if it's connected to Power BI for visualizing predictions. So if I could have a quick overview of all these process, that would be a lineage that I can consider from a machine learning. So how would that look like? This would be something that I'm looking for. So this is a conceptual architecture of what we are going to achieve. For this specific example, there's a GitHub repository that I will add that link to the video description part here. So you can check that out. There are full description of what we're going to follow is there. You don't need to take note or copy any codes. Everything is actually there, and I'll show you how you can get it and utilize it and go through the steps that we're going through using this video. So what we're going to do, there is a use case that actually going to predict the risk of credit, or better to say, you have historical data of loan applications, the borrower data, and you want to sort of predict the risk of credit. Regardless of the use case here, this is just an example of how we can create lineage from machine learning using Purview. So you have the data sources and you do some steps from data engineering perspective, which means ingesting the data, some pre-processing, and that can be done on any service. You can use Synapse. Here we're going to use actually Synapse, or you can use even Azure Machine Learning. And you can see Purview is here, and also Purview is here as well. That means I can track steps here and get the lineage starting even from the ingestion or from data store even. And then preparation, and then we're going to train and deploy the model. We can still have even Purview to track where the data model get trained by who and where it's deployed, so we can have all this from data source all the way to consume, being monitored, being tracked as a lineage for machine learning. So the final results that we are going to achieve and what we're going to see in Azure Purview after having this lineage for machine learning would be something like this. There you go. So you can see we have the source data, we have loan data set for this example, the borrower information, doing some specific experimentation, creating some data sets, model training, having some assessment and to understand what are the metrics, let's say what is the performance or accuracy of the model, deploying a model, or we can have just a batch inference, and then we're gonna have the endpoint information. So if you have the model deployed, let's say real time, what is the URL that I can connect to my model, do the prediction, and get the results back and visualize in Power BI. So all these steps, they can be done in different places, but they're now being tracked, and the lineage is there for me for all machine learning projects that I can create using Azure ML, Synapse, regardless, but they will be all in Purview in aspect of lineage. So let's go through the code repository that I'm going to use for this video. Here it is, which is called Purview Machine Learning Lineage Solution Accelerator. Again, I'll add this to the video description here so you can check this out. But there are some notebooks that you can run on Azure ML, which is going to train a model using AutoML, do some batch prediction, and the lineage will be tracked all the way to Purview, and we're going to see how. Or there are some Synapse notebooks which we're going to run them, and in Synapse I can connect to Azure ML through the Python SDK, train some models using AutoML, and then even deploy it as a real-time endpoint as well, not just batch, and again being tracked as a lineage in Purview. And some data examples, again for this credit risk use case, you have the borrower and loan examples. Again, regardless, these are just examples of training a model, and all the information that you need to follow step by step to create that lineage in Azure ML. So first you need to, of course, deploy Microsoft Purview if you don't have it yet on your Azure. You need to have Synapse. As an example, we're going to use Synapse for training models. So we're going to see how when we do some pre-processing training models through connection to Azure ML SDK, how that's going to be available from lineage perspective in Purview. Or no, if you want to use Azure Machine Learning, which is fine, you can then deploy Azure Machine Learning as well and run the code that can train the model, do some batch prediction, and you will see the lineage in Azure Purview. So in order to create these main three services, there's a button here that says deploy to Azure. If you click on it, you go through the process through Azure portal after authentication, and you will deploy all these services, which I have already did this, so I'm not going to redeploy it again. So let's go to my portal. Here's my Azure portal, and you can see I have already deployed using the same button that I showed you in the repository. So it deployed Synapse for me, Purview for me, and Azure Machine Learning, right? So before we start, here's the first step you need to do. In order to send the information, for example, let me give you an example. Let's say you are in Azure Synapse, and you're doing some pre-processing, some data transformation, and then you train the models using the AutoML of Azure ML, and you want to give Purview these informations that, hey Purview, check, I'm doing this transformation, I am using this data set, and my data is coming from, let's say, data lake. So you have to sort of tell Purview what are the steps you are following in Azure ML, right? So how you can achieve this? There's a Python library. We're gonna check that what is that Python library that you need to install, and when you code for your machine learning, you have to use that Python library to ship the information to Purview and say that, hey Purview, these are the steps I'm doing. So in order to have the permission to send this information from the way that you're coding your machine learning steps to Purview, you have to use, one of the ways is actually using service principal, which is like an ID that has permission to Purview to be able to ship those data information to create the lineage for you inside Purview. So the first step is creating a service principal for Purview REST API access. And we will see what type of permissions we have to give to that service principal, so we can use that service principal to connect to the REST API of Purview and send those ML steps information to Purview to create the lineage there. Creating service principal is fairly simple. If you haven't done that already, you just need to go to your Azure Active Directory and click on application registration, and afterwards you need to click on new registration, and then you have to give it a name for your app and select register. Then you have an application created for you that you need to write down what is the ID of that application and create a secret for that and write it down somewhere because you need it when you're going to use this service principal. So I'm not going to create again, I have already created those, and it is something that we have already discussed in other videos, so I skipped those parts to show you how we create it. But if you just quickly search creating service principal on Azure, there are tutorials and very quick examples how you can create this, which can be fairly very quick, like in 1 minute or two you can just simply create one. So after you have created that service principal for Microsoft Purview REST API access, then you need to tell your Microsoft Purview that, hey, trust this service principal, so whoever like MG later want to access the Microsoft Purview API using that service principal, let the access to be connected. That's okay, I trust. But now Purview doesn't know, so you have to tell it. How? Then just quickly click on the Purview that you have created. Open Microsoft Purview Governance Portal. This is how Microsoft Purview look like. And then you have to click on Data Map. Then just simply click on Collections. And when you're here, you'll see a tab called Role Assignments. Here's the place that I can assign some roles for that service principal that I have to say that, hey, give this service principal these type of permissions to let it connect to this Purview. You can see that here I have added my service principal that I created to multiple roles in Purview. And I'm going to tell you what are those roles and how you can give them access to your service principal. The first role that you need to give access to your service principal is collection admin. So you can see the description here that this is simply a powerful role that can edit all your collections, the details, the information that you have there, and they can also add some specific roles as an admin to this Purview collection, which is adding data curator, data reader, or other Microsoft Purview roles as a collection scope. So this is the first one that you need to have. And in order to do so, just click on add and then put the name or the ID of the service principal that you created before here. When you find it, just click on OK. This is exactly what I did. The next role that you need to do the same is data source administrator role or data source admin here, which can manage the data sources and data scans. We need this permission because when we are creating lineage from our machine learning code and send those information using the REST API of Purview to this collection, We need to have that permission. So we need to have sort of managing the data sources scans and scan some sources that we have to check what data we are using for training those models. And the last role that you need to provide access to your service principal is data curator role to access the catalog data plane, which is technically here. So that role will enable your service principal to read, modify, create, and delete actions in the catalog data objects. This is sort of exactly what we need to also achieve when we are creating Lineage. Not the must, but definitely it can be needed. So the same thing, clicking on plus sign here, you can find the name of your service principal and click on OK, and that's it. So now that service principal we created has access to REST API with proper permissions to create our machine learning lineage when we code in machine learning, regardless of if you are on Synapse or Azure Machine Learning or anywhere we are. That's all. So what is the next step? Now we sort of need to exactly do the same with Azure Machine Learning. Why? Because if you, let's say we're gonna code in Synapse, and for the time that we are training our model, we want to connect to Azure ML SDK from Synapse. So we need to get authenticated to the Python SDK of Azure Machine Learning. How that authentication can happen, then we can use a service principal. The way we use for the Purview REST API, now we can use also a service principal to connect to Azure ML, right? So the same way that I told you, you can create another service principal, and now this is the time that you need to give permission to that service principal to get access to Azure Machine Learning. And what's going to be the role that we need to give permission to that service principal? It will be contributor role needed for this specific example. How we can do it? Well, just click on the Azure Machine Learning workspace that is created, go to the access control, click on add role assignment. You can see the contributor role is here, click on next, and then you want to give that contributor role to a service, the second service principal that you created, right? So the first one is okay, and just go to next. You just need to technically, let me go back to show you how you can select. You can click on select members, and then just type the name of the service principal or the object ID, and you're good to go. You can just find it, click on it, and just click on review and assign. So I'm not going to do that, I already did. And my second service principal has contributor role access to this Azure Machine Learning. And we're gonna see where we're gonna need these service principal, right? So let's go back to my Azure portal. So what's gonna be next? We talked about Purview, we did some permission level, we did the same for Azure ML, and now the third one is Synapse. So first of all, you need to add your own IP that you're using to actually go through this demo to the firewall or access control, to the security and firewall of that Synapse that we have created. So if I click on the Synapse that is created for this demo, and if I go to networking, you can see that the client IP, which is mine, that it has been already created and it has access to the Synapse. So how you can do it, just click on add client IP, and it will automatically add your IP technically to have access to the networking of that Synapse that you have created. So make sure it is there to be able to actually connect to Azure Synapse. Also, with this Synapse, there's actually a data lake that has been created, and what we need to make sure is that yourself, I mean you as your username, has also access at least as a storage blob data contributor role to that data lake. So let's check it out. If it's not there, make sure you give access to that as well. So if you go to the portal after creating this Azure ML Synapse Purview, you'll see that there is a storage account created, similar name to the Synapse that I have on the top. And if I click on it, you will see that this is the data lake that is created with Synapse. And if I go to access control, then I can add myself. Just here I am admin, just search for admin and give your name, and make sure you select the role storage blob data contributor. Let me find it. There you go. and then click on next. Just select your name, here I am, and click on create. That's it. I already did, so I have access to this data lake. Now what is next? Now we are sort of done with configuring these access controls and creating service principals. That's the time to do some coding. For this part of the video, we're gonna start with Azure Synapse. We have our ML training and pre-processing codes there, and we are using some sort of Azure ML capabilities using the Azure ML SDK in Synapse. So where the codes are, well, if you download the repository that I showed you before, which is here, you'll see that there's Synapse notebooks, they're all here, and also the data example that we're going to upload to use is here as well. So make sure you clone or download this repository, so then we can upload it to Synapse, and I will show you how we can do the uploading. Let me go to my Synapse and launch this service. This is my Synapse workspace, and what I need to do first, I need to upload those sample data that I showed you before. So for doing so, click on data, select linked, and just click on the primary data lake Gen 2 that is created with the, this is the same data lake that we checked our access. I added my as a storage blob data contributor, that's the same one. And there's a primary container created called data. It is there by itself without me creating it. So previously this one was empty and you will see nothing, but what you need to do, create a folder here and name it as created risk data. I did it already, and how I did that, well, just with simply creating a new folder here. You can just click on new folder and type this name, create this data, and then this is going to be empty, right? But it was empty, so I uploaded these two data from that repository that I showed you. So here's the repository. Go to the data folders. Just when you have these downloaded, just upload it simply to this data, to this created risk data folder that you created, with just simply clicking on upload. Then you will see just these two for your case that is uploaded under this folder, under this container within this primary data lake. Awesome. So what we have done, we already created a data source for a machine learning use case, and it is now accessible from a data lake that is also Synapse, connected to Synapse, so I can load it to my Synapse codes, right? But before doing so, let's make sure we register this data in Purview, and then we can scan this data lake in Purview, and Purview will understand, oh, when I was scanning this data lake, I figured out MG has two new data sets, which is borrower CSV and loan CSV. And also to just show you how Purview can scan and create that kind of data governance for you, and grab the metadata for you there in just one unified platform, which here is Purview. So let's do that very quickly. So for registering this data lake as a source in Purview, I'm gonna go back to my Purview again, and then when you are in your Purview, go to data map. Then when you are in data map, you'll see that there's a tab called collections, and you will most likely see nothing here if this is a very new Purview for you. So you need to first create a connection. I already created and I named it as data. This is just an example. You can name whatever you're preferring, but for doing so, just click on add a collection, give it a name, and then figure out the admins by their name or email address and click on create. That's it. I already have one, and what's happened, if I go to now my sources, you'll see that under my root collection Purview, I have a collection called data, or that can be any name that I chose. Now under this collection, I want to introduce my data lake as a source for the borrower and loan CSV files that we have. So for doing so, just click on register. Where is your data coming from? It's from my Azure data lake, right? So you have to find Azure Data Lake Gen 2, click on continue, and here you have to find your storage account from your subscription. You will see the name of your storage account listed here. Just click on it and click on register. I already did it, and that's why you see it got appeared here. Now that's the time that we can scan this data like using Purview. So Purview will tell us, hey, I found this data and these are the metadata information that I'm tracking, right? So how we can do it? Here's the scan, new scan icon. Just click on it, and it says that give me a name for your scan so I can track. It is using auto integration runtime hosted on Azure. And here's the key thing. Microsoft Purview is asking me what is the credentials to access into that data lake so I can scan it. There are multiple ways that you can do. One of them, and recommended one, is using the manage ID of this Purview. So this Purview has an ID. So give that ID enough permission to get access to that data lake. We haven't done that part yet, so that's why if you click on test connection, it will fail. So we have to do something that will show you what, and then when you come back here, click on continue, you'll see the scan gonna be finished and done. So what you need to do first is giving enough access to his Microsoft Purview manage ID to have permission to access to that data lake. Let's see how I did it. So I will go back to my portal. Here is the data lake that I want to scan. I go to access control and click on add role assignment. And can you guess what role is needed? Well, we're gonna scan the data. So storage blob data reader would be enough for this specific task. So click on it. And now we're gonna use the manage ID of the Purview to get access to it. To provide access to manage ID of Purview to scan this data lake. So click on manage ID, and then when you select members, it will say that I know that you have one Microsoft Purview. Would you like to give access to this Purview as a data breeder of this data lake? I would say yes, and you'll see that it automatically find that Purview for me. So I clicked on select and I'm done. I did it. I'm not going to do it again, so I'm closing it. Now when you come back here, if I test connection, you'll see that connection is so successful. It has been able to connect, and if I click on continue, it will create this scan. So I did it before. You can check. If you go to view details, it tells that MG already had one scan being done before, 5 different assets discovered. For you gonna be 2 for now because I added more assets after running some codes. And you can check out even the scan that has been done with the name completed, what time. If I click on it, I can have sort of more information about this scan, what files Purview found them in my data lake, so it knows the data I'm going to use for this machine learning. I can do the scan again, but for now I am good to go. And you can see the collection path also has been created, and it is telling me that it's coming from this subscription under this resource group. So you'll see that sort of the source of the hierarchy of the source of data is getting visualized for me, which is great. Now if you want to check what has been discovered by this scan, just click on that collection data. You'll see that all the assets has been found for me, and there you go. The loan and borrower CSV files has been identified here because of that scan. That's awesome. So what is the next step? That's the time to get to the codes in Synapse and run them. So let me go back to my portal, Synapse again. I will launch my Synapse workspace. And for this example, we're going to use a Spark for some sort of transformations. So we definitely need Apache Spark pool as our compute to run the code. If you don't know Synapse supports Spark and how we can use it, then this is the part. Let's create an Apache Spark pool if you don't have it. How we can do it? Click on manage, just go to Apache Spark pool. There should be one already created because of that infrastructure as a code that we deployed the services. If it's not there, that's okay. Just simply create a new one. And if you want to check out what gonna be this information you need to enter, which are very obvious and descriptive what they are, but let me show you mine so you can create the same thing that I created. So here's the configuration that I have. It's memory optimized, that's the node size. I have enabled auto scale. Minimum 3 to 6 nodes is enough, more than enough actually. Number of idle time that I have in minutes, dynamic allocate enabled. So you can even pause the video and go through the rest of these configurations that I've created. So I'm gonna close, and after creating, you will see one gonna be appeared here. Click on it, you should be able to see the properties actually here. So what we are going to do, we're gonna install a library, a Python library, that we can have it in our code in Synapse to talk with Purview REST API and create the lineage there when we code our ML process in Synapse, right? What is that Python library? I'm gonna show you what it is. If you go to that repository in the deployment, under deployment folder, there's a requirement text. With opening that, you will see that there's a Python library, which is PyApache Atlas, that needs to be installed on that Spark pool to be able to talk with the REST API of Purview. So how we can install that under Apache Spark pool? Well, just simply, you have downloaded, I assume you have downloaded this requirement text already. So get back to your Synapse, click on these 3 dots beside your Spark pool, and you should be able to see the option called packages. Click on it, and you need to upload that requirement text from the directory that you have downloaded on your machine. I already did this, that's why it's here. And when you click on apply, it will go there and install all the libraries that you have specified here. For now, we have specified just one, which we needed for connecting to Purview. And that's it. Now you have a Spark compute ready to utilize for your codes, and has also the library needed for getting access to Purview. Now, what's going to be the next step? The next step is that we need to import all the Synapse notebooks that we have downloaded from that GitHub repository to the Synapse workspace to execute them. So for doing so, go to develop, click on this plus sign, add a new source, and you can just say I want to import them. And then just simply select those Synapse notebooks that you have downloaded from the repository, which are Synapse notebooks, and here. I already downloaded them and uploaded them actually to the Synapse. That's why you'll see that I have these notebooks uploaded for me. Now, after doing so, what you need to do is you need to update some of the codes here with the information that you have from the service principals you created. So let's open the first notebook. Remember, you created 2 service principals at the beginning. One of them was for accessing the REST API to authenticate into the REST API of Microsoft Purview. The second service principal was for authenticating to Azure ML Workspace through Azure ML Python SDK. So you need to have the information of those service principals and add it to this code. So, for example, here in this cell, it is telling me that get the service principal information you created for your Purview, which is step 2. So what is the tenant ID of that service principal, the client ID, and the secret of that service principal? That's it. And then just write down the name of the Purview you have created, and you can certainly see it in your Azure portal. That's it. The next part is giving the information of your Azure Machine Learning workspace. What is the subscription ID, the resource group of that Azure ML, the name of that, and the region. That's it. Let me scroll down, and last part is adding the service principal information you created for Azure ML authentication, client ID, and the secret of that service principal. Paste them here, and then you don't need to change anything in this code. So this notebook is for authenticating to your Purview and also Azure Machine Learning workspace. If you want to know how, well, this code is using that library that we installed from requirement text file to authenticate to Purview, Atlas server with the information we specified on the top, and then we create the Purview client from that authentication that we have done. Very similar thing, we can do authentication to Azure ML using Azure ML SDK with that service principal we created. Now I am connected to my Azure Machine Learning workspace. So this is what this code is doing. The second notebook is, remember that I showed you what we are going to see in Azure Purview? Let me show you again actually to make it more tangible. This is sort of what we are expecting to actually track, to call it lineage for machine learning. You can see we have different type of assets here. For example, the first part, these are data, and these data sets are coming from data lake. So because their type, which are data set, they're already defined in Purview. Purview can understand where they are coming from, which are coming from data lake. So there's a data lake logo added beside that. But some of the other assets, for example, the model that we train is a very specific asset type. So we need to define it for our Purview using that library that connects to Atlas server to say that, hey Purview, when I say that I have an asset called model, you should know what that asset is. That asset is a machine learning model that we have trained. So first thing, we need to define those assets. The second thing that we need to define for Purview when we code, we should tell Purview that how that model is created. For example, this is the model created. This is the endpoint that has been created out of the model after deploying that. So what model we use to deploy, this is, for example, the model that we have. So you see that there's input to that step and there's an output to that step. So the second thing that we need to define is the input and output of each step, which is ins and outs of lineage. So two things. First, the asset type. Second, the input and output of those assets. We need to define them when we are coding in our machine learning, so Purview can track them. Let's see how those codes are doing this actually. Let me go back to my Synapse works. Here you are, and the second output is creating those asset types or lineage types, which are machine learning lineage types, because we are dealing with the machine learning use cases, which is obvious. So use this actually code as a reference when you create your lineage type for ML or even some specific non-ML use cases. So how can I do it? I'm using the library that we installed, and we need to specify the entity type here, for example, and give it a name. For example, there's a custom data set that we're going to transform to use it for training models. So that's a custom data set out of an experiment, out of a transformation code. So I'm going to define this as a dataset type and create a custom dataset type that Purview can use and have it in the lineage. And then you can specify the format, and then you need to just say upload this to the client, which is my Purview is my client. Now there are different specific lineage types. Here is, for example, column mapping that we're going to do. Here is a specific ML workspace that we have to define it as an asset in our lineage. So when Purview show the lineage, it should tell me where each Azure ML workspace has been used to, let's say, train the model, right? So it has to be defined as a lineage type in Purview. That's why I'm creating that actually here. And then these are the information that I want to track in the lineage related to this workspace. So when I go to lineage to check there's a model trained by MG in that workspace, so if I click on it, I should know that which Azure Machine Learning workspace under what name, what subscription ID resource group has been used to create that model. So the same thing for data store, that's Azure ML data store. What Azure ML data store was used, what Azure ML data set was used to create that model. So you can see that all different type of lineage that I want to track, which are ML related, are getting created and defined in Purview. So there are much more. You can go through this step by step, figure out what specific types has been created, but these are for this specific machine learning use case, and you can use it as a blueprint for your ML lineage. And instead of starting from scratch, there's a code ready for you that you can utilize it. The next thing is defining the input and output of this lineage, right? So that's the the third notebook. You can see that here are some functions that has been defined, so we will call them when you're running the last notebook, which is doing some sort of machine learning types. So for giving an example, there's a function that we are going to create the lineage. Let me check where it was. Scrolling up. Let's go through this one as an example. So we want to create an entity with a schema on parent. So we're going to define the input and output of that. For here, the entity type, we're going to create based on Azure ML dataset. So Azure ML dataset, as you know, is certainly coming from data. We have registered that. And it is coming from an Azure ML data store, because dataset going to be registered under data store. So that's why this creating data entity with blah 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 is created here to specify any lineage for any specific data set coming from a specific data store. So if you're gonna, for example, next time for your own project create that lineage, you don't need to actually create these codes again. Come to this code, and actually there are lots of functions that do a similar thing for different entity types that you can take a look and utilize this as a reference or a blueprint instead of coding from scratch. And it is sort of, I would say, a template that can be also modified, but it is good enough at least to start to track the main assets of Azure machine learning project for the lineage in Purview. And we will call these functions in the last code notebook as well. So what you need to run is actually the last notebook, because this last notebook will run these notebooks sequentially, so you don't need to run them one by one. For running this notebook, you need to make sure you're attached to that Apache Spark pool that we created. So it's already there, and just click on run all. So I have already ran all the code successfully. I'm not going to run it again, but I'm going to show you what they are and what's going to happen after you run them. So after you run them, the first, second, and third notebook that we went through them going to be executed, and then the last codes, which is under this notebook, going to be executed. So let's check what they are. First, make sure that you upload this part. Change this part. You need to put the data lake name that you have uploaded your data, which was borrower data and loans data, and then type the name of the container or file system that you have uploaded the data, which is again data as the name. So make sure you add these two. This is going to be the same for you, but this one should be changed based on the name of your data lake that your Synapse is connected to. And you don't need to change any part here, because it knows that your data is under credit risk data folder. This is the one you created. And you can see I'm using a Spark here for this code to do some specific transformations, dropping some columns, merging, so on and so forth. Regardless, you need to define experiment name, and it's going to be tracked with the same name in Purview, and you can use the same name even for Azure ML. For training model, I can code and have my Python code in Synapse to train a model, but here I want to use AutoML, and as you know, AutoML is in Azure Machine Learning. So I need to authenticate to Azure ML using Azure ML SDK. And remember, we created a service principal, that's why now this code can connect to Azure ML. And then call AutoML of Azure ML to do this classification for me. That's exactly what we are doing here. You can see that I am giving a name to that experiment and then running AutoML for classification, let's say to reject or approve a loan or not. Before that part, you see that how I am creating the lineage in Purview, and because we are connected to that Purview using REST API, we are creating actually a base path based on that file name. So when we're gonna go to Purview, we'll see that, oh, the data is coming from here to train that model, right? And then of course each lineage entity in Lineage has input and an output. So the output of that transformation is a custom data set, and we have already defined that entity type in code number 2, notebook number 2 here. So let's go, and you see that here we are creating a pre-process lineage with specifying the inputs and outputs again. So after running AutoML, we're gonna grab the best model from AutoML, register the best model. I'm skipping this very fast because we already talked a lot about this part. There's a dedicated video I created about AutoML. I'll add this to the right top of this video. Check that out if you don't know what is AutoML of Azure ML. I'm assuming that you are already familiar with. So with registering the best model coming from AutoML, I want to also track the packages that I use actually for training this model or running this code. You can do that as a part of your lineage in Purview as well. That's why I'm creating a package entity with having this information tracked in Purview. How I am doing that? Well, in that blueprint lineage function, there's a function that you can use it to create package entity in your lineage. That's why it's pretty simple. I'm just calling it. That's why I'm telling you can use these functions as a reference. Also, I want to create a lineage for training my model. Then again, any lineage should have a type. We already defined the type. Any lineage entity should have input and output. Give it a name and create that lineage using the function that has been specified here. So now my Purview has pre-process plus training steps added to the lineage of my machine learning. And here is the environment that is needed to get registered for inferencing. I'm getting this from AutoML again, and I'm using actually some you can use curated environments of Azure ML. Again, I'm not going to talk about them. We have went through a lot of these information. If you don't know what is Azure ML environment, again, I will add this to the right top of this description, this video. And then here I want to do inferencing with using the best model that is coming from AutoML, and then I can download the results and write it as a table, for example, that here are the predictions coming from the model. And of course we can register it again in Purview that to say that here is a new custom data set, which I call it, for example, batch inference or prediction, that is coming from my model, so I can track it when I go to Purview from my lineage diagram. So before going to the Purview and see what happened when we trained, deployed the model, we did the batch inferencing, I want to check out what is happening on the Purview. But before doing that, this repository has some codes that you can run them in Azure ML. So if you're not using Synapse, you're not using Spark, very similar thing can be done in Azure ML. I already did this because it's very similar to what we did in Synapse, I'm not going to explain all again, but just briefly show you how that's gonna look like. If you go to the Azure Machine Learning that you have created from this repository, and by the way, when you finish those Synapse code, you will see that there's job created here. If I click on it, you'll see that it's an AutoML because we ran this AutoML from Synapse. So, and if I go to the models, you'll see that there is a model created by Synapse code. If I go to endpoints, you will see that also an endpoint has been created, which is a deployed model, a real-time endpoint that does the prediction for credit risk. Now, how we can do this with Azure ML? Let's say we're coding end-to-end in Azure ML, but we're gonna track and lineage, have everything with Purview. So very similarly, you just create a compute. I assume you already have a compute in Azure ML, and just upload the AML notebooks from repository over here. What are those Azure ML notebooks? Well, you'll see AML notebook. Just upload this folder using this plus sign here. You can see I have it already here. And you need to again first run this code, which is the AML pipeline, and second, which is the lineage pipeline. And it is using the same sort of code to create the lineage, entity types, create the lineage, and then define it in Purview. But of course, make sure you update the authentication information. Remember what we did? We added the service principal, client ID, secret in that code. Exactly the same thing need to be done here. And after changing this code, which are pure credentials, run this code first and this one second. And what you will see, this is what you will see in the job section. You'll see that your data coming from preparation, train test exploit, you trained the model, and then you did batch inferencing. And again, this one as well will be tracked in Purview because I used Purview REST API. So again, regardless of you did the Synapse one or here you did the AML one, what you will see in the preview will be this. So let me go back to Purview. There you go, it's getting loaded. Click on Browse Assets. Remember we created this collection and you chose a name by yourself. Just click on that collection. You will see that everything coming under this collection has been scanned and detected, but if I go to the source type, you will see that some other different types, not just the data, has been connected to this collection and tracked. Remember we defined these specific types, entity types with those Python codes. We have the model, Azure Machine Learning package, Azure Machine Learning workspace. We have the machine learning model by itself. We have machine learning endpoint. These are the specific types that we defined, and then we push them to the REST API of Purview so they're tracked. Let's say, for example, we know that this data collection is under this data lake, and oh, I see an ML model, which is also part of this collection. Let me check that out, where this is coming from. This is a model And if I click on contacts, we can even check out who are the contact, add, edit them. But let me check the lineage. I'm curious to know where that credit risk model is coming from. Like, there you go. I click on lineage, I can see, I see the borrower data and loan data. From that data, like, you can go and just move your pointer here. It will tell you where is that data lake coming from, what is that data lake name. And then there are some specific pre-processing. You can click on it to get more data. And then that pre-processing step created some custom data set. Then it went through some machine learning experimentation, and then this model has been created. Also, I can see what steps are using this model. I can say that, oh, there's an endpoint created out of this model, and that endpoint did some predictions, and here's the predicted value, and I can check where the predictions are, which is a custom data set again. So with clicking on any of these steps, you can switch to those assets to grab some more data. Who is the contact? What is the lineage of that asset? Overview, properties. For example, if let me go back to the model again, go to the browse assets, custom model, checking out the lineage. I'll see that, oh, okay, there's a endpoint, machine learning endpoint created out of this model. That means this model has been deployed. Okay, I gonna know what is that URL of that deployed model, so I can call it and do some predictions, or at least see which Azure ML was being used, by whom, which resource group, which subscription. So let's click on it, switch to that asset, and I want to get an overview of this asset. Sorry, the properties. There you go. I can see created by who, and it is deployed on what. Oh, that's an Azure container instance. That can be, let's say, Kubernetes. And this is the scoring URI. Perfect. So I know how to call this model to do predictions. Okay, I can say the Azure Machine Learning workspace name that has been used to deploy this model or get to train this model even, and the resource group and resource subscription ID of that specific deployed model. So that's all. You can see that this is just one use case, one Azure Machine Learning workspace. Now imagine if you have a ton of machine learning use cases, different workspaces, different resource groups. You can have them all being tracked in from lineage perspective in just one unified platform, which is Purview. So that's the power of this integration, and this use case and code repository that we went through was just an example to show you the art of possibility here. Check out those codes. Personally, I haven't went through all those codes for creating the lineage, so I used them as a reference to create it because that was a code provided through the accelerator. Take a look. You can customize those or use as is for your specific use cases, and hoping you will find this helpful. And that's all. Your smile is your logo. Your personality is your business card, and the way that you make others feel is your trademark. Wish you wonderful moments, my friends, and we'll see you next week.